So on behalf of the St. Anselm Institute, I'd like to welcome you to our final public lecture for the year. We've had 5, and so this is a great addition. I'd like to formally announce that we're celebrating our 15th anniversary of the St. Anselm Institute. There are ambiguous origins of the St. Anselm Institute, so we get to celebrate for about a year and a half or so. So we had an initial idea and then the actual execution. So we're going to milk this thing for about a year and a half or so. Speaking of the beginning of the Institute, there actually are 2 people in the audience that I'd like to recognize. The first one is Joe Davis, who's a professor of sociology and research director at an institute here at UVA. And Tom Strasberg, who's been our loyal treasurer and secretary and our videographer, and both of these individuals, in fact, are responsible for everything good that's really come out of the Institute. Without their assistance throughout the last 15 years, we really couldn't accomplish the things that we've been able to do. So I'd like to thank those 2 publicly. I'd also like to thank Nicholas Schrink, who came up with the idea of inviting our guest speaker today. So without his initiative, we wouldn't actually have the event this evening. So if you have some good ideas, you want to be a little entrepreneurial, whisper in our ears, and then perhaps we can actually make it possible. So with that, I'd like to actually begin with a formal introduction. So in many ways, our guest today really represents the best of the intersection of the University of Virginia and the St. Anselm Institute. Both institutions promote the idea of serious, deep, and lifelong learning. And our guest today actually is an exemplar of deep and serious and very diverse learning. More formally, Dr. Koch has been a student of mathematics and physics. He holds a degree in theoretical physics with an impressive scholarly record. For many years, he also was a member and the head of the Department of Sensor Data and Information Fusion at the Fraunhofer Institute, the largest institution of applied research in Europe. In addition to this research, Dr. Koch regularly teaches computer science at the University of Bonn. More recently, it has become apparent that Wolfgang Koch's interest and studies include areas that extend considerably beyond the ones that I've just mentioned. With his wife, Dorothea, he has co-authored a very well-received book on the life and importance of Konrad Adenauer, a Catholic statesman who was the founder of the German Christian Democratic Party, who also served for many years as West Germany's first post-war chancellor, leading Germany's efforts to reconstruct and to reform itself as a nation. In this lecture this evening, Professor Koch will extend his insights about Konrad Adenauer and about what he was striving to accomplish by inviting us to focus on another time, the 8th and 9th centuries, and another person, Charlemagne, who in his time helped to construct and to reform the central idea and reality of European Union. With that, I invite you to give Professor Koch a warm UVA welcome.
Thank you very much for this very warm introduction, and I must say I'm very pleased and touched that I am able to talk about Konrad Adenauer and Charlemagne in the city of another great statesman, Thomas Jefferson, in his very university that he has founded. Well, Charlemagne is not only a topic which is interesting for historians. Charlemagne and his culture, his vision of Europe, had deep impact on the roots of the new Germany that was formed after the Second World War, and that impressed not only Konrad Adenauer but also his fellow statesmen, Alcide de Gasperi, the Italian Prime Minister, and Robert Schuman. And I would like to talk about this. Charlemagne as the historic person, but also his influence until our very time. Who is visiting Aachen, Charlemagne's city? Is in a sense standing in the very heart of the Christian West, in the very heart of Europe. And these 2 images are symbols of what Charlemagne wanted to show. It is a vision of the heavenly Jerusalem, and it is Charlemagne's throne, and we will look why Charlemagne's throne is so important for German and European history. Theodor Hecker, a German academician and the academic mentor of Hans and Sophie Scholl, the two perhaps most prominent victims of Hitler in the time of the Nazi regimes, wrote about this chair. The chair of Charlemagne is in a church, and the dome arches in front and above it with the enthroned Majestas Domini. The Imperium Romanum, the Roman Empire, has become the Sacrum Imperium. And that's a very important notion, the Holy Empire of the Christian West. And the chair of Charlemagne is on German soil. This chair is the most venerable national sanctuary of the Germans, and it is exciting shudders. This says Theodor Hecker, who was prosecuted by the Nazis. So Charlemagne was called in his lifetime the father of Europe. And when we are looking at today's Europe, not only we, but also prominent politicians look at Europe with sorrows and with pessimism. Helmut Schmidt, for example, Chancellor of Western Germany from 1974 to 1982, recently wrote in an interview, "I do see the current situation in Europe pessimistically." And he says, "I would like to want a coup of the European Parliament." Very strong words. The current generation of politicians is unable to solve Europe's problems. This says an important politician. And he says it to the former foreign minister and vice chancellor of Germany, Joschka Fischer, in a recent interview. Well, the predecessor of Helmut Schmidt, Konrad Adenauer, also made references to Europe. And quite interestingly, Adenauer received the Charlemagne Prize in 1954. This was the year of the 1200th anniversary of the death of St. Boniface. And St. Boniface is one of these founding fathers of what we call now Europe. And this is what Adenauer says. Adenauer, in the time where he was in the middle of his beginning and his attempt to rebuild Germany and Europe together with his colleagues after total destruction morally, physically, materially, spiritually, in every respect. In this city Aachen, Charlemagne city, which was the main residence of Charlemagne and the coronation city of the German kings, we are standing in the very heart of Europe. In the very heart of the Christian West. Here in Aachen lies open the book of history of the early Europe, the times in which Europe has had coherent order, and when the European idea has been a spiritual and political constructive power. So we are speaking of Konrad Adenauer, we are speaking of Charlemagne, and we are speaking of how this vision for which Charlemagne stands has had an impact on the forming of the European Union and of the new Germany. And this is what I wanted to talk about. I would like to discuss with you, or to bring clearer, perhaps in a joint attempt, what is Charlemagne's Europe, and what does Christian West mean? What is this very notion? And what was it to the founders of the European Union, and can it be a model for today? So that's quite a program, I think, but I hope that this will simulate a discussion afterwards. First of all, we spoke of the Charlemagne Prize. The Charlemagne Prize is a prominent prize which is given every year to prominent politicians who have merits in forming the modern Europe. And in every year, at the day of the ascension of our Lord, all European politicians and prominent statements are passing a door in the at Charlemagne's palace in Aachen. And above this door, there is a medieval description that shows Christ, the Pope, and the worldly power, the emperor. And a philosopher, Alois Dempf, explains in an important work of history of philosophy of history, Sacrum Imperium, Holy Empire. He describes what is symbolized by this piece of art. Christ is king and prophet, his and the secular and the spiritual sword that he uses on earth by using the spiritual and temporal power in such a way that the both powers balance and limit each other, the limitation is important, and are oriented to Christ. This piece of philosophy, Sacrum Imperium, was written 1922 in Bonn, at the University of Bonn, very close to Cologne, in the very center, very close to Aachen, in the very center of the Christian West. And most interestingly now is that this piece of philosophy of history, is dedicated to a very important politician. It is dedicated to Don Luigi Sturzo. This is the dedication in Latin. To Don Luigi Sturzo, which was the founder of the Italian Christian democracy movement and the mentor of Alcide de Gasperi, one of the founding fathers of Europe. So this vision is at the very roots of what's going on after the Second World War. By the way, there are ongoing beatification processes for Don Sturzo and Alcide de Gasperi. This vision of Christ the King, at the beginning of the European movement, has also this European dimension. Alois Dempf wrote in the year 1928, addressed the German Catholic Confederation of Professional Association, maybe something similar what you are doing in the St. Anselm's Institute. He wrote, the Catholics of Europe have to agree with the idea of the kingdom of Christ. Another way out of the current situation does not exist. Actually, this reliquary of Charlemagne's skull cap, becomes from that time a sort of icon, a symbol of the medieval vision of Christ the King. By the way, when Alois Dempf worked at the University of Bonn, he had three equally important fellow private docents at that time. It was Karl Barth, the Protestant philosopher who worked for a very long time in Bonn, Eric Peterson, the Protestant theologian and Christian archaeologist who became an eminent Catholic theologian, very much esteemed by Pope Benedict XVI, and Carl Schmidt, a problematic person, a Catholic too. Well, there was an intensive exchange between Dempf and Adenauer after 1933, in this time, when the ideas of the new Germany was born. There were meetings between Adenauer and Alcide de Gasperi already in the 1920s. Yeah? But these persons have known each other for a very long time. After 1945, Adenauer tries to appoint Dempf at the University of Cologne. Adenauer lets Dempf speak at political meetings of the Christian Democratic Union, the CDU in Germany. And Dempf is a founding father of a think tank of the CDU. The most interesting is a photograph, which is to be dated in the year 1922, when Adenauer and Dempf began to meet each other, and at that time also Alcide de Gasperi was member of the party. And this is actually a photograph taken by the ruins of the Drachenfels, close to Bonn, which will become the capital of Germany. And nobody at that time would have dared to guess that Bonn is going to play a role somehow in politics. And by the way, Adenauer at that time did not know that he will build a house at the very foot of the Drachenfels rock. Now, this is Bonn. Bonn was the residence of the Prince-Elector of Cologne and the Archbishop of Cologne, two positions that were joined. Joseph Clemens of Bayern consecrated Bonn, his residence, to the Immaculate Virgin on the 8th of December 1715. This consecration was often renewed, very often. The last renewal was done by Cardinal Meissner in 2012. Bonn is a very old city. It was more than 2,000 years old, and it was built on what was left from the martyrs Cassius and Florentius, and Empress Helena herself built the first church for these Roman emperors. Until today, there is in the town hall of Bonn, there is a statue of Our Lady, which remembers at this event of the consecration of Bonn to the Immaculate Virgin, right behind this door. And this is perhaps now interesting. In the year 1963, your president, your Catholic president, by the way, Kennedy, is visiting Bonn, and right behind him, not to be seen on this figure, is Our Lady, directly behind him. And Kennedy is speaking of Bonn in a way that nobody could expect. Let us listen to him.
The city of Bonn is the capital of the free world. Because of the efforts of the Chancellor and all of the German people, it will continue to be a center of the free world. I salute you.
So this city, consecrated to Our Lady, becomes a center of the free world. This does not say a German politician, but an American one. What does Christian West mean? What is this notion? And very important for the Christian West is St. Benedict. And Benedict XVI, the Pope Emeritus, very clearly describes the role that Benedict has for building Europe. And it is certainly this vision that is one of the reasons that led him to his choice to be named after him. St. Benedict is therefore deeply venerated in Germany. He is a fundamental reference point for European unity and a powerful reminder of the indispensable Christian roots of his culture and civilization. What you are seeing here is a statue of St. Benedict in Monte Cassino. Monte Cassino was totally destroyed by the Allied Air Command because they thought German troops are on the Monte Cassino. But if something is destroyed, there is one profession happy, the profession of the archaeologists. The archaeologists try to analyze the situation, and actually they found the basic walls of the very first church that St. Benedict built on the Monte Cassino, a church devoted to St. Martin of Tours, the very first Benedictine church, the very cell from which the Christian Europe grew. This was detected. And now, see what happens. Konrad Adenauer, from his private means, donates a statue which shows St. Benedict in a scene that is described by the Legenda Aurea. He has received the last sacrament. He tries to stand up. His pupils are helping him, and this very moment he dies. Yeah? And this very statue is gifted to the Monte Cassino by Konrad Adenauer, by his private means. There is no way to express Adenauer's link to this idea in a more direct way. But Christian West. We speak of Christian West. Actually, the Christendom came to Europe by the West. Yeah? It came via the Anglo-Saxons, via the Irish and the Scottish monks in several waves. And so we can safely say, we Germans can say, that we owe our Christianity to the Anglo-Saxon world, yeah? To the Irish world, to the Scottish world. The key city in Germany was Fulda, yeah? the main foundation of St. Boniface. St. Boniface, a monk, a Benedictine monk coming from Great Britain. And this Boniface is today in Fulda. And Fulda is an important city for German Catholicism. The German Conference of Bishops every year meets in Fulda at the very beginning of Catholicism in Germany. And if you are going to Konrad Adenauer's house, which is publicly visible, you can visit this house, and you are just entering the door, you see on your left hand a statue of St. Sturmius, the first abbot of Fulda, the pupil of Boniface. And Boniface often was for retreat and for recollecting his powers in the abbey of Fulda and was served by Sturmius. So the Chancellor of the New Germany made a reference by this statue in his very private house. And it's interesting perhaps how the German newspaper in this very year, 1954, when the 1200th day of death of St. Boniface was celebrated, it's in German but gives you an impression of what Boniface was. received at this time.
2 Wochen lang wurde das Bonifatius-Jubiläum in Fulda gefeiert. Vor 1200 Jahren wurde St. Bonifatius, der Apostel der Deutschen, bei Dokkum in Friesland von Ungläubigen erschlagen. Höhepunkt der Feierlichkeiten war die große Reliquienprozession. Hohe geistliche Würdenträger aus 13 Staaten nahmen daran teil. Auch Bundeskanzler Dr. Adenauer war zu der Feierstunde gekommen. Vor dem Hauptportal des Domes wurde vor 65.000 Gläubigen ein Pontifikalamt abgehalten. Die Bedeutung des heiligen Bonifatius liegt neben seiner Missionstätigkeit vor allem in seinem erfolgreichen Bemühen, die Kirche zu einigen und zu festigen.
So Boniface was present in the public opinion, in the public mind. And this is the tomb of St. Boniface in Fulda, and an important German historian, a very professional one, Josef Fleckenstein, very well known, summarizes the Frankish church had in fact been renewed, the impulses of the Benedictinian reformers had noticeable effects, and it should not take long that they also strongly shaped the general intellectual life, contributed surprisingly rich fruit, and created a spiritual renewal. That was the beginning when Charlemagne entered the stage. We should talk about the notion of Christian West. It was so often meant what Christian West is. Theodor Heuss, the first federal president of post-war Germany, in a public speech tried to define what Christian West is. So not a private opinion, the federal president of post-war Germany, Theodor Heuss. There are 3 hills, he says. 3 hills the Western culture rests upon. It's Golgotha in Jerusalem, the Acropolis in Athens, the Capitol in Rome. From all of them, the West is spiritually woven. And all 3 are, so we have to see them as an inner unit. The current president of Germany, Joachim Gauck, seems to express the very same thought. He recently said, ranging from ancient Greece through the Roman Empire and the Roman idea of law and jurisdiction to the dominant Christian traditions of faith. And a professional historian, important one, Winfried Becker, he summarizes what the Christian West is from a more scientific or historical point of view. The notion of the Christian West is not merely a mythical or religious political concept, but tends to capture the historical and philosophical culture of an identity space. Novalis and Friedrich Schlegel, the Romantic poets and philosophers, ventured a re-evaluation of the Middle Ages as a long and important period of European history in which the continent achieved its cultural unity on the basis of the Christian religion. So it's a political fundament. Perhaps, quite surprisingly, your President Kennedy makes a clear reference to one of these hills, to the hill that is mentioned by the Capitol, the Roman idea. And in the crisis of the Cold War, in the front city of Berlin, he makes a reference to Roman citizenship using St. Paul's words, I am a citizen of Rome. Some of you know perhaps the last part of the sentence, Ich bin ein Berliner. But Ich bin ein Berliner, I'm a citizen of Rome, is nothing else but a reformulation of this civis Romanus sum. Let us listen to your president.
2,000 years ago, the proudest post was civis Romanus sum. Today, in the world of freedom, the proudest boast is, Ich bin ein Berliner.
So a reference to the Christian West. So what is Charlemagne's Europe now? Well, Aachen is the intellectual and spiritual center of the Carolingian Renaissance. And actually when the Baron showed me today your university, I had the idea that these ideas have in some sense a similar idea, because those wanted to build a jewel of education, of intellectualism, of spirit, of culture in the wilderness. In a sense, Aachen was such a jewel of culture and spirit and everything in the wilderness. And let us look how this Aachen, and let us also listen to the music of the time, how Aachen was meant. This shows the reconstruction of what Charlemagne's residence was, the palace chapel, and these buildings, Charles University, the University of Aachen, so to say, was located, and the Schola Carolina, the choir of the Aachen Cathedral, sings a hymn that prizes Aachen as the seat of Charlemagne. So Aachen now is the first university of the Western world. And Charlemagne collected the leading intellectuals to his court. For example, the Anglo-Saxon Alcuin, who was an eminent scholar with an enormous influence. Also, Alcuin's pupil Rabanus Maurus, later abbot of Fulda, which is called the teacher of Germany. And you know Rabanus Maurus very well from the Veni Creator Spiritus you are often singing. It was composed and written at the court school. Alcuin was the one who tried to collect a scientifically reliable text of the Holy Scripture. The Alcuin Bible was the relevant, scientifically proven text until the 16th or 17th century. Yeah, so very important scientific work. Einhard is important. Einhard, a pupil of Fulda, later the son-in-law of Charlemagne, Paulus Diaconus, and very important also Theodulf of Orleans, an important Western Gothic researcher, scientist, theologian, and many things. Charlemagne actually was the man who established the Gregorian chant as a chant of the church. Of course, the Gregorian chant was a chant of the Roman church, but locally confined to Rome and the surrounding areas. Charlemagne and his father Pippin immediately recognized and realized how important music is, liturgical music is. And already Charlemagne's father Pippin sends Chrodegang, the bishop of Metz, to Rome to study liturgical music, and the Schola Sanctorum in Metz, the city which was so important for Robert Schumann later, the founder of Europe, was founded in 783. And Charlemagne founds the Schola Carolina in Aachen, which still exists with an unbroken tradition, developing a notation. So the first way to write down music was created in Aachen, not Guido of Arezzo. And the spreading of the Roman chant in the Christian world started from Aachen. So in Rome it was created, from Aachen it was spread in the Christian world. Let us listen to Einhard, his biographer and son-in-law. He attended church regularly, Charlemagne. In the morning and evening, took part in the nightly hore and masses as long as his health allowed it. He insisted on celebrating all services as solemn as possible. With greatest attention, Charlemagne improved liturgical reading and psalm singing. He was in both even well versed, also in the public. He never read aloud and sang softly in the choir. Notker Balbulus, another early biographer of Charlemagne. Those are reliable sources for history. Tireless in his zeal for the services of God, Charlemagne was pleased that in the spreading that in spreading knowledge his desire of Rome to get experience singing clergymen, the Pope approving his good intentions and God-inspired seal sent according to the number of the 12 apostles, 12 competent singing clergymen from the apostolic see. So the beginning of the Gregorian chant, and actually on each Palm Sunday we are all singing a hymn that was written and composed by Theodulf of Orleans. Charlemagne's heritage is present. In Charlemagne's court, so to say, the ancient form of hypertext was created, the Carolingian minuscule, a way to write down texts in a way that can easily be copied and easily be read, and in such a way that errors are avoided. So in a sense, the hypertext was invented by Charlemagne. No, but Carolingian minuscule was invented by Charlemagne. And a wealth of book illustrations and of art popped up in this court school. Very interesting is we spoke of the three hills. So we have seen Rome. Where is the Acropolis? Well, the Acropolis is present by Aristotle. Aristotle is very important for the Catholic doctrine, for the Catholic theory, and all think that this is related to the Renaissance of Aristotle that was conveyed by the Arabs, by the Saracens in Naples. But the adaptation of Aristotle started at the court school of Aachen. So what is characteristic of Western science, this polarity of intellectus and ratio, of empirical discourse and comprehensive theory, that was actually born in Aachen. And also Augustinus is present at the Carolingian Renaissance, as well as in other renaissances of Christian life. Einhard wrote, Charlemagne also loved to listen to the works of St. Augustine, especially to his treatise De Civitate Dei. And actually the inspiration to build his church in Aachen, which is devoted to Our Lady as Virgo in Coelo Assumpta, and the inspiration to design it as a symbol of the heavenly Jerusalem comes from Augustinus. There were cosmological debates at the court of Aachen, perhaps in such a way as we are discussing now about the Big Bang and Stephen Hawking's theories. Charlemagne asks, what is nothing? It must be great. Since God created the world, whole world of it. A very clever question. Very clever. Yeah. And he asked Alcuin, and Alcuin, this was a discussion, cosmological discussion. And a treatise of Fridubius, a pupil of Alcuin, it was written. This is from this time. Yeah. A treatise that even impressed St. Thomas Aquinas. And it makes clear that there is a scholastic approach. First, a clarification of the question, then an answer ex ratione, based on grammar and semantics, and then a reference to divine authority. And in such a way, the existence of nothing is discussed, and the darkness at the beginning of creation is discussed, very cleverly, very subtly, actually. And the Aristotelian notion of categories is there, the notion of substantia and other notions. And this was known at Charlemagne's court via the tradition of Boetius, who translated Augustinus into Latin. These are Alcuin's lecture notes in physics. Of course, at the court of Charlemagne, there was not this insane division between liberal arts and natural sciences. For Alcuin, natural philosophy includes arithmetic, astronomy, astrology, mechanics, medicine, geometry. And there's a clear indication for Alcuin's love of the natural sciences. The wisest people were those who found out these arts in nature. And actually Charles continuously evaluated the educational standards at his university in a quite modern way, I guess. And this is reported. So we have written documents that describe the atmosphere of learning and of liberality of mind at Charlemagne's court. And Alcuin's method was respectful but also humorous, and it is shown in ironically provocative dialogue. So we have this dialogue in Alcuin's Disputatio de Rhetorica. Charles asks, tell me, what is a sophistic speech? And Alcuin says, if another has asked me from this school, I would probably have told him. There's liberality, yes. Charlemagne was the big emperor. Why another one and not me? Why shouldn't I grow in knowledge? And then this discussion goes forth and back in a very clever and intelligent way. And finally, Alcuin says, in order to let you know at last the sophistical subtleties and to let you realize how somebody can catch you, I will tell you. And then, oh, you can see that now. So that's an atmosphere at this court. Many pieces of arts, wonderful arts, are created at that time. The gates of the church and many things that you should see and argue yourself. But I would like to come to this throne, which already captured our attention at the very beginning. It is called the arch chair of the empire. So that's a very important thing for the medieval times. It was built after the description of the throne of Solomon, when the king made a great throne covered. Then the king made a great throne covered with ivory, with the 6 steps and the description of how the throne was formed. There are 4 pillars. Also, this is described in the book of Kings. They are polished smooth by countless pilgrims. Thousands, 100,000s, millions of pilgrims have went beneath the throne. Is that a tribute to a political king? And you see there is a sort of box, yeah, you can open this. And this, under the seat, there was the repository of the imperial Evangelia and St. Stephen's purse, a very precious jewel designed by Alcuin with a very subtle program, which contained earth with the blood of St. Stephen. So the emperor sits on the throne like Solomon, and a clear reference to the gospel and to the blood of the emperors, the blood of the martyrs, the first martyr. Well, what can we tell about the marble plates from which the throne is made? They look strangely at the first sight. You find, for example, here a mill game, a Roman mill game, and actually the archaeologists know more than 100 parallels at public places. So mill games where people just played. So these are plates from a public place. If you look, you see here a crucifixion scene from the 5th, 6th century, which is kept during the construction of the throne. You see with an ultraviolet lamp, you see a 7-armed candle with the serpent of the paradise. You see the very first Maltese cross. Yeah? And you see many graffitis, crosses, Calvary mountains. What is this? Where does these marble plates come from? Well, these marble plates were a gift from the Patriarch of Jerusalem in the year 799. And these are the floor tiles and the steps to the palace of Pilate. So this throne is made from the marble plates on which Christ stood and said, "Yes, I am a king." So now we can understand what this throne is. It's Golgotha in Germany. It's a very important piece for the medieval time and for Catholics in Germany. It is Golgotha. We had Aristotle, Greek, and we had Rome. This is Golgotha. And from this throne, the coronation of more than 30 German kings began. So there's a clear reference to Christ the King. Actually, for Charlemagne's coronation, the Laudes Regiae were composed. And perhaps we are listening to them and that absorb what is meant by these Carolingian composers and text writers. With a piece of Gregorian chant that is well known to us. So when we speak of Charlemagne, then we speak of a man in which the medieval world has seen a symbol of Christ the King. Actually, a version of Charlemagne's Laudes Regiae have been sung at the presentation of the Pallium and the Fisherman's Ring, well, to Pope Francis. You see how present Charlemagne is. Aachen, the emperors, his successors took reference to Charlemagne, and Friedrich II, why Friedrich II at his university in Naples, Aquinas will study, yeah. So at the University of Friedrich II, Charlemagne is studying. No, Aquinas is studying, and he is gifting the shrine for Charlemagne, which is today in the Church of Aachen. And Einhard says, his biographer, finally all agreed that he, Charlemagne, could be buried with honor only in the church which he himself has built at his own expense in Aachen, out of love for God and for our Lord Jesus Christ, and in honor of the Holy and Eternal Virgin, his mother. There he was buried on the very day of his death. Charlemagne's shrine stood in the middle of the church, and perhaps we should absorb this and listen perhaps to a piece of the Charlemagne Mass. In the year 2014, last year, on the occasion of Charlemagne's 1200th year of death, scientists analyzed the content of the shrine, and they find a fairly complete skeleton of a large, healthy man, 184 centimeters high, 78 kilograms, about 70 years. And this is a text from the scientific article on this, based on the results of 1988. To now, we can say that it is highly probable that the skeleton is of Charlemagne. The statement of Einhard, another comment of this article, Charlemagne had lived in late years, fits the findings. We found ossifications of the kneecap and the heel bone. So Charlemagne, that's proven now, scientifically. And I would like to summarize here a little bit what Charlemagne was to the medieval world. I said at the beginning that Charlemagne Aachen was the very heart of Europe, and if you are traveling today to Aachen, you might get a glimpse of what the medieval vision was. Perhaps we listen also to another piece of the Mass for Charlemagne and look at the Cathedral of Aachen with its many editions of all the times of the Christian Middle Ages and the Baroque times until to the 19th and 20th century. Often, Charlemagne is called the butcher of the Saxons. And in the public discussions, you see that this is often the main argument to counter Charlemagne and to reduce him to this aspect of cruelty on the battlefield. It's very interesting now to see an important German professional historian, Horst Fuhrmann, very respected historian, in his book, and he explains how the name Butcher of the Saxon was created. This name was given to him especially by the representatives of the National Socialist ideology, since in their view Charlemagne has done harm to the Saxons, excellent representatives of the Nordic race. The Hitler youth sang songs of the Saxons, storm, proof, and earth-rooted, prizing Widukind, Duke of Saxon. So this is the origin of this notion. Actually, in one generation after Charlemagne, there was the oldest document in Old Saxon written. So it's one of the oldest written documents in a language which is a common root of your language, English, and my language, German, the Old Saxon language. In the year 2020, the Helian Epos was written, which is a paraphrase of the Gospels. And this poem must have been very popular and widespread because it exists in various manuscript versions with about 6,000 lines. So only one generation later, Christianity was fully adapted by the Saxons. And it might be interesting to listen to the Old Saxon, for example, to our Father in heaven.
Þú bist af dem hóhon himmelariker. Gewishet si þín namo ordo gihuilego. Kumma þín kraftach riki.
That's a language that's at the very root of our both languages, modern languages. But what was Charlemagne's political program? Well, political program in a spiritual sense. I would like to come back to his cathedral. In his cathedral, he expressed what he wanted. And if you go right in the middle of this cathedral and look straight ahead, you see what Charlemagne's programs is. And I'd like to talk about the dome mosaic. I would like to talk about the chandelier. There was a Carolingian chandelier, which was replaced by a more splendid chandelier later. I would like to talk about the bronze gatings, and last but not least, on the consecration inscription here. Well, in 1720, the Carolingian mosaics were destroyed by the spirit of the times. Yeah, that's obviously a disease at every time. So, because this is much nicer for the Rococo time, they destroyed the Carolingian mosaics. We get a glimpse of what they originally were by going to France. The only Carolingian mosaic that has been preserved north of the Alps provides at least an idea of what Aachen was done. As in Aachen, these mosaics were designed with their theological program by Theodulf of Orleans. Luckily, in the 19th century, there was an attempt was made to reconstruct these mosaics, and they give us an idea of what Charlemagne made. And what is represented? Well, it's a heavenly Jerusalem. We see much gold, a symbol of the radiating perfection of God. We have an abstract symbol of God as the center of everything. We see the evangelists, and we see Christ the King. In Carolingian time, it was probably a lamp. And we see the 2 times 12 beings and the fellows. We see all these characters described in the book of Revelation. We see that the crowns of the kings and rulers are only borrowed. All earthly power has an aim, Christ. And this chain carries Emperor Barbarossa's chandelier, and it was formerly a Carolingian chandelier. And let us absorb this idea of heavenly Jerusalem a little bit by watching. Of course, you should visit Aachen, but perhaps you can't. So the Cathedral of Aachen is, the political program is, of the Cathedral of Aachen is the new Jerusalem that comes down out of heaven, adored, prepared like a bride adorned for her husband. I would like to talk about these bronze gatings. They were originally golden, gilt. You say gilt? Yeah, so not bronze, but with a golden cover. And they are the crown, the golden crown there. And if you look at these pieces of cast work, they are the most splendid cast work actually known. Full of symbolism, full of hidden indications of deeper meanings. Actually, the Carolingian ornaments are a secret language in a way, in which many hidden messages are sent out, and they express the heavenly ocean, the eternal life. So these ornaments are full of symbolic meaning. So Aachen, the Cathedral of Aachen, is a symbol of the heavenly Jerusalem. And now Charlemagne has an initiative. By his initiative, Cologne becomes an archdiocese, and his friend, St. Hildebold, a saint, becomes Cologne's first archbishop. And this was a huge diocese. It comprises Bremen, Utrecht, Lüttich, Minden, Münster, Osnabrück. Still today, Cologne is one of the biggest dioceses in the world. And Cologne has a title which is valid until now. The title, Sancta Colonia, Dei Gratia Romanae Ecclesiae Fidelis Filia, Holy Cologne, by God's grace, the faithful daughter of the Roman Church. That's an official title that this city has. And there are only 4 medieval cities that have this title. Of course, Jerusalem, Rome, Constantinople, and Cologne. And Hildebold does this. Hildebold builds his Hildebold Dome. Well, this is a reconstruction of the Carolingian cathedral. Now, at this place, the Gothic Cathedral of Cologne that all of you know was built. And Hildebrands's mission was build a whole city, the medieval Cologne, according to the heavenly Jerusalem. The whole city should be an image of the heavenly Jerusalem. And this mission was fulfilled. In the course of the century, Cologne was surrounded by the famous Romanesque churches, which perfectly symbolize all these relations in the Book of Revelations, and up to the military fortifications. Cologne had the longest medieval city walls, which 12 gates, 7 double gates, 53 towers, perfectly matching what is described in the Book of Revelation. And so the churches and even the city walls. And in this city of Cologne, your president is coming. And obviously, your president is fully aware of the importance of Cologne. And let's listen to your president.
This was the city of Albert Magnus, who taught St. Thomas Aquinas. For Cologne is not only an ancient German city, it is also an ancient European city. A city which since Roman times has played a special role in preserving Western culture, and Western religion, and Western civilization. The problems of the Western world are in many ways different than they were 2,000 years ago, but our obligations as citizens remains the same: to defend our common heritage from those who would divide and destroy it, to develop and enrich that heritage so that it is passed on to those who come after us. Your fellow citizen, Chancellor Adenauer, has fulfilled these obligations as a citizen of the West in full measure. It is in this spirit that I come to Cologne to see the best of the past and the most promising of the future. May I greet you with the old Rhenish saying, Kern Allah.
So, this is not a Sunday sermon. This is not scholarly speech in a priest seminary or in a university. Here speaks the most powerful man of the world at his time, and he speaks in the most public way that is possible. And the best of the past and the most promising of the future. And here he says exactly what tradition is. Tradition is tradidi quod et accepi. To hand on what you yourself has received. Exactly this. From your president. You are the president of Canada. It's very interesting that at the very evening of this speech, Kennedy gave a banquet, oh there's some German there, sorry, a banquet speech on the evening of the Cologne visit. And he ends with very touching words. And may I say that when I leave the office of the White House, whenever that may be, well, 5 months later, he will be shot. I'm going to leave an envelope in the desk for my successor. And it will say, to be opened only in saddest moments. So it will have only the words written, go, visit Germany. That's your president. That's a document, well documented. Yeah? So he was well aware of the importance of this spiritual world. You see here the two men that began to build up the modern Europe, Konrad Adenauer and Robert Schuman. And there's a quote of Schuman in 1946, Christians must fulfill their duties in the best possible way, because whatever they do, it always serves the establishment of God's kingdom on earth. They must be aware of this. So the coming down of the heavenly Jerusalem became a political program. And quite recently, in May 2012, Cardinal Montois, the Archbishop of Paris, and at this time the president of the Bishops' Conference of France, so an important bishop, made a clear reference to the Book of Revelation in a sermon that he gave on the 60th anniversary of the Schuman Declaration. this was the birthday of modern Europe. As the seer of the book of Revelation, we are invited not just with raised eyes to look to heaven, but to see the presence of heaven on earth. 5 years after the end of the war, Adenauer and Schumann were able to realize in a new phase of history. This peace stems from the fact that God dwells in the middle of the people. We are called to become aware of the new city in the middle of the worldly city. This new city is the light of the world. But this very notion of the heavenly Jerusalem was present at the roots of Germany. I would like to talk about the inscription, which was written by Alcuin. Beautiful Latin. I wrote the English translation. And interesting is the sentence. And when everything fits together in equal proportions. So that's a key word also perhaps for modern Europe. What does this mean when everything fits together in equal proportions? The Cathedral of Aachen is a very symbol of this. Everything fits together in equal proportion. Very recently, in 2012 actually, researchers identified the underlying measure, the King's Foot of Aachen, 32.27 centimeters, which is the unit after which the Cathedral of Aachen was built. And with this as a measurement unit, even numerous and highly symbolical proportions taken from St. John's Apocalypse can be shown all over the building. So it's a highly symbolic building. But it's also an astronomical observatory, which is very interesting. Charlemagne's church expresses the astronomical knowledge of his time, and it can be seen as an observatory. And Einhard, his biographer, reports that Charlemagne was very much interested in astronomy. The king spent much time and effort to the study of rhetoric, dialectic, and especially astronomy. He learned arithmetic and pursued with great thirst for knowledge, with attention and interest, a very clear statement, the movements of the heavenly bodies. And so, on Christmas, the Christ monogram is lit by the noonlight. It shines up. I've seen this myself. Suddenly it shines up. The globe of Barbarossa chandelier, there was a Carolingian chandelier before, shines on the Virgil of Christmas and on St. John the Baptist's feast. And a man like Napoleon was very well aware of the symbolic meaning of Charlemagne and the astronomical proportions. And on St. John's feast in 1804, he gave order to produce a portrait of him standing by Charlemagne's throne, and his shadow is exactly there where it is on St. John's feast. So a man like Napoleon was very well aware of this, and actually he made lots of references in his own coronation then in the same year. It is beautiful to look into the books where so many details were described. So the phases of the moon, the phases of the planets, the phases of planets like Venus were exactly described. Ways of how to predict eclipses were described here. So the full astronomic knowledge was collected and improved at the court of Charlemagne. I would like to come to an end, but I cannot come to an end talking about Charlemagne without talking about Our Lady. This is a special relation between Charlemagne and Our Lady. If you look at Charlemagne's church, you see here himself, well, with a rectangular, how do you call this, halo or so? Perhaps it's not holy. And Our Lady. And he devotes his church to Our Lady. And if you are entering Charlemagne's church in Aachen, the first book you are seeing is Our Lady. And there is a big inscription from Carolingian time which calls the church of Charlemagne Sanctissimum Templum Mariae Virginis. And the Cathedral of Aachen is fully a Marianic church. Aachen holds very precious reliquia. What is a reliquia in English?
Yes.
A relic. a very precious relic, a cloth of St. Mary, a piece of cloth where the head of St. John the Baptist was carried after his decapitation. I never used this word. And the napkins of Our Lady, of our Lord, and the cloth that our Lord carried on the cross. Well, of course, many debates. Are these relics to be trusted and whatever? They cannot be proven. Of course, they cannot be proven. But it can be shown that how do you call this in English? The pampers of our Lord. What is this in English? Napkins? Diapers. The diapers of our Lord. The diapers of our Lord. And the dress of Our Lady. By recent research, sound research, these relics could be traced back until the 3rd century. And in the 3rd century, that means at the time when there was a prosecution. It was before the Diocletian prosecution. Yeah. So in a time when the Christian religion was not yet a state religion. Yeah. These were venerated as if they were what they are said to be. And then after that we cannot trace them back. So there's no proof that these relics are proven in a scientific sense. They cannot be a proof. But we can be sure that the people believed them to be what they are. Yeah, so very precious relics. And they were collected in a very precious golden shrine. And there are many other hints to Our Lady. We have a miraculous image of Our Lady. Many miraculous healings took place from the medieval times. And we have this wonderful lady, apocalyptic lady in the choir. And so it's not strange that the very first Marian hymn, was composed in Aachen in German language, in old German language. From what I've said, it is clear that Aachen is for Germans, for the German soul, the Christmas church in every respect, because it's the dress of Our Lady that she wore in the night of the birth of our Lord. We have St. Stephen's verse, and actually that's the reason that we have the second day of Christmas, St. Stephen's Day. That traces back to Charlemagne. We have this shrine, and also the oldest German Christmas carol was composed and sung first in Aachen. But Aachen is devoted to Our Lady, the Virgo in Cielo Assumpta. So the Assumption of Our Lady in the heaven, and that's the core of Aachen. And actually, in the Gothic choir of the Aachen Cathedral, this lady, this Virgo in Cielo Assumpta, is there. This choir was built by Charles IV in the 14th century. It was necessary to build a big choir because Aachen was one of the largest pilgrimages in Europe. in the year 1496, we have exact numbers, or relatively exact numbers, 146,000 pilgrims in Aachen, which is a huge number, imagine, medieval times. So this choir was built, and this choir was built as an image of heaven, of course. In the middle is Our Lady. And I should also say something about the court music. It began with the Gregorian chant, but the Schula Carolina, the tradition of liturgical music was a living tradition. And Aachen plays an important role in the development of classical polyphony, classical sung polyphony. And perhaps we are listening in the end to Johannes Magnon, which is one of the grand masters. And in his piece, the Virgo in Cielo Assumpta is prized. Assumpta est Maria in Cielo. That's a big love story between Charles and Our Lady. The Assumption of Our Lady is the patronage feast of the Charlemagne's church in Aachen, and also the patronage feast of the Cologne Cathedral. And Charlemagne and Alcuin participated in the Synod of Mainz 1813, where Archbishop Richulf, also a pupil of Alcuin, introduced the feast of the Assumption of Our Lady in Charlemagne's empire. So the 15th of August was introduced on the initiative by Charlemagne. And there is an interesting link to our present time. In the year 1950, in the year when the European Union was founded, the dogma of the Assumption of Our Lady was promulgated by Pius X on November 1st in Rome, which was a big event, listening to the sources. So let us come to an end and try to make some conclusions. What have been the prerequisites of Charlemagne's renovatio imperii Romanorum, of the renewal of the Roman Empire? Well, it was Boniface acting in unity with and supported by the Roman Pope. Very important. Previously, the papacy had to overcome a deep decline, and it was overcome by a great Pope, Gregor II. Boniface reformed the religious life. He founded cloisters and dioceses, and the bishops and abbots were highly educated and unanimous. It's often said in the historical sources, unanimous Benedictine monks. And Charlemagne's mission as a Catholic statesman, besides protection, of course, protection belongs to the mission of Charlemagne. Protection in a very unsafe world at that time. But this was not my topic today. So Charlemagne's mission as a statesman, besides protection, well, it's summarized by an important German professional historian. Highly developed was Charlemagne's sense of responsibility in religious questions. A Christian ruler also has to ensure that faith and religious practice remain poor. So, and how does it look like? Well, care of all spiritual and intellectual knowledge, including science and law. The Alcuin Bible is an example, a trustful text. The Carolingian Minuscule, a way of how to propagate knowledge over time. The recovery of ancient literature. Nearly everything that is known to us from the Roman and Greek time was saved by the monks writing and copying this literature in Aachen and in the Carolingian cloisters. The recovery and worthy celebration of the liturgy, very important, including the care of the Gregorian chant, very important piece. The beautiful liturgical books,
ecclesiastic equipment, churches, mission stations. And Charlemagne even stimulated theology. The filioque in our creed is stimulated by Charlemagne, and the in Cielo Assumpta, the Assumption of Our Lady, we already said. Charlemagne met St. Ludger, an important German saint, in Monte Cassino, and he gave him the mission of Friesland and Saxony. And Ludger in 1793 founded the mission diocese Münster. And he established the parish system. So the parish system, that is still very important for our church, was invented in that time as an instrument of organizing and stabilizing mission. The once hated doctrine has become deeply rooted in Saxon tribe, deep rooted, that's wrong English, and was totally accepted, so that the church could point with particular pleasure at this new territory. And we have Saxonian emperors, from Otto the Great to Heinrich the Saint. And we have to mention Charlemagne's masculine and strong devotion of Our Lady. Despite of all of the sins of promiscuity and cruelty, our biographer Einhard leaves no doubts that he was a sinful man also. So, Carolingian Renaissance, is that a model to overcome today's crisis? Perhaps the Renovatio Imperii Romanorum is what happened always when the church had to be renewed. And perhaps it's the same program, in essence, like the Instaurare Omnia in Christo, the reform program of Pius X, which was canonized by Pius XII in this very year, 1954. In the year where Boniface was remembered, and Adenauer received the Charlemagne Prize. Who might be the next? This is the very last picture. It shows Konrad Adenauer praying in Rome, in St. Peter's Cathedral, by the tomb of Pius X, not at that time canonized, but beatified, in June 1951. This was his very first visit in another city. The first invitation of a prominent German politician by another nation. And I also have a statement from the official declaration of the Charlemagne Praise for Adenauer in 1945. Well, in the year where Pius X was canonized. The high efforts of his political habit overcame the old quarrels and deepened the desire of our people to become part of a large European community. Thank you very much.
A few questions. We have a short reservation in this room, but I'd like to open it up to the floor.
There's such a strong history here of Catholicism, Christianity in Europe, yet you would think it would be easy for Europe to keep in mind that Christian heritage, but it seems through a lot of the 20th century and unfortunately the 21st that this rich history is either taken for granted or overlooked, but in any case it doesn't seem to be celebrated with the amount of fervor that one might think. Now, I'm on this side of the Atlantic. You have a much closer view of what's really happening in Europe. But do you see a revaluation of Christian heritage in Europe, or do we have is secularism still going to reign?
I see a European crisis, and actually Europe is really on a ridge. It has to take decisions. Europe is close to lose his or her vocations. Is Europe a woman or a man? It's a woman, of course, her vocation.
Okay.
It's the daughter of Zeus, of course, her vocation. Robert Schumann, the great, he's one of those who's called Father of Europe, and an ongoing beatification process for a politician. Take that in mind. This is something. He said in the early 50s, Europe will be Christian, or it will not exist anymore. That's a statement. So for Europe, that's my conviction, it's very necessary to look back to these roots. And by the way, when Europe was built, Europe was totally destroyed, especially Germany was destroyed, but all the other European nations were destroyed too. There was a very, very clear phase of hopelessness and despair. If you look at the literature and the pieces of art, despair after the Second World War. And then there was this flourishing period from 1948 to 1963. But Adenauer resigned from chancellorship. This was a period of not only of a rebuilding of Germany materially, but it was a recovery of Christianity at this time. And by refining these roots, which were lost at that time, or hidden at that time, Germany and Europe could overcome this extreme crisis after the Second World War. So my hope is that perhaps after the crisis that is going to come for Europe, I'm sure there will be a big crisis, there could be a time of a recovery. And of course, also in Germany, many things are forgotten. And the reason why I'm talking to you is to remind these things. But these are documents. Listen to your president. Yeah? So, John F. Kennedy, who was not a traditional Catholic, of course, he was a modern Catholic. Of course, I know everything, yes. No, but I know many bad things about him. Of course, his promiscuity, that maybe he's similar like Charlemagne, that is this Kennedy was well aware of what the Western Christian West was, because he was Catholic and had these roots. Yeah? I think an Angela Merkel or François Hollande or your President Obama or your perhaps future President Clinton would not have the possibility to say something like that. He was aware of these roots, and from these roots perhaps a new flowering could be possible. That's my hope. Yeah.
Do you, today, when you think about Europe, do you automatically think of the European Union, or do you think of something different?
The European Union was designed in clear continuation of this rich cultural heritage. This was how it was designed by the founding fathers. Today, it has evolved into something very different, which is driven by political power, by economy. It has no longer a soul. Yeah? It is just a club, well, a gang of robbers that think together we can we are stronger and can be better robbers than others. Our Pope Benedict in the German Parliament made this metaphor. He gave a speech in the German Parliament. The Pope, it was wonderful for us Germans, gave a speech, and he opened the speech. He says, what is a state different than a gang of robbers if there is no faith and something like that? And what is Europe other than a gang of robbers if there is no Christianity in it? Or like Robert Schuman said, Europe will be Christian or it will no longer exist. That's the vocation of Europe, I think. So I'm not thinking of this Charlemagne's world if I look into today's newspaper. No, I'm not. But perhaps.
Okay, on behalf of the St. Ansel Institute, I'd like to thank the audience and the wonderful things, and especially Professor Koch.